Yes, the world is confusing would be an
inconsistency. The world is confusing, but profits are ripping and companies are doing great because they figured out how to hold the bottom line.
Okay.
And now there's no non-competes.
Welcome back, friends, to another week of More or Less. We've got the full squad in town, Dave and Britt Morin and Sam Lessin. What's cooking?
Hey, guys.
Guys, I narrowly escaped jury duty yesterday.
How did you do it?
First of all, I was the third juror called in the box. Not sure if anyone here has ever done jury duty.
I've never made it to the box. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I've never made it to the box either.
I was in the box all day, and with 10 minutes to go, finally got dismissed. But it was a narrow dismissal. And in the process, I had a couple of thoughts. One, the NPS of jury duty is so negative. They asked multiple times, who wants to be here today? No hands raised. The process is terrible. I think technology has so much opportunity to transform this process alone. And I don't know how to get it done. But if there's like a nonprofit
the most
out
Brit
there
statement ever
that wants to work with me, I'm just going to put that out early in the pod. It was the worst thing ever.
It's interesting. I have been called for jury duty a few times. No one would ever want me on a jury. There's no chance.
I thought about you, actually. I thought about you in the moment, Sam, because I was getting questioned all day long about where I live, what I do, what do I think about bias, and I was like, Sam's responses would kill this.
The other thing you just do, if you really can do, just buy a one-way ticket to Canada, because if you're like traveling internationally, they just tell you to go home. So that's the other back door. But I do think there are two types of people in the world. There are people in the world who like are excited about jury duty, and there are people in the world who are not excited about jury duty. And to me, I got to say, I believe in civic duty. I think juries of peers are very important intellectually. But practically, when someone's like, oh, I'm going to jury duty, I'm like, really? Don't you have more important things to do? That's the honest reality.
Have any of you guys ever served on a jury? No one's gotten that far.
Well, I will say, I haven't. I will say my grandfather.
I got close. Yeah.
My favorite jury story of someone who actually did serve on a jury is my grandfather, who's 92 now. He served on a jury like last decade. And my favorite, he was on some grand jury. They went through a bunch of cases. It was like this big thing. And he loved it. He was like, Sam, these criminals, they are ingenious. And he's talking about all the interesting ways these criminals that they had. And he was just like so floored by the creativity of crime. So when you're 80 and you're helping society and crime, but I feel like, we got to record a podcast, guys.
Well, Britt, I'm glad for yourself, for your team, for your family that you have escaped this. This seems like a good solution all around. I would gently guide you away from starting a business to tackle this problem.
Yeah. No, this isn't a business. It's a nonprofit or something that can make the justice process better.
I will say that the last time I had to go and sit in the room where they're like, when you're waiting to go into the jury room and they show the little video of like how good America is, you do kind of like tear up a bit because America's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's true.
It's like, you're like, wow, America's great. And I like that flag video they roll out on the little dolly with like the TV from 1920.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Two quick questions. Well, this reminds me of the show Jury Duty. Did you guys see the show Jury Duty?
I'm obsessed with the show. Okay. And it played out in real life.
I thought it was a funny premise and I enjoyed it, but I also feel like it could have been like a single episode of television, not 15.
It didn't need to be 15 episodes.
It's a three-part series.
What I was remarking to Dave about last night was how incredible they are at randomization of the people they choose in this 50-person selection process. I've got the like trans person, the gay guy, the old lady, the like college student. They're like 50-50 male, female. Like you got kind of everyone represented, the wealthy person, the not wealthy. Like it's very representative. And I do feel like maybe is there technology they're using for
There's
this?
Some AI there. No, I don't know. Probably
AI for jury duty. It's going to be the big thing, guys.
It turns out the world is diverse, maybe, kind of. I don't know. Well,
I mean, at least no. Like if you put the wrong Silicon Valley person on this podcast, they'd give you some asinine thing about how AI will be the jury in the future, and then they'll do it gleefully. they'll be like, and good news, we'll have better jurors because they'll be AI based. And you're like, you've got to be kidding me.
Okay. Question number 2 of the moment. Sam, what is around your neck? And please describe it to our listeners.
I just wanted to go for some flair. We have more and more YouTube video people. And I saw this on Instagram and I bought a neck scarf.
Does this have to do with your newfound piloting vocation?
Yeah, well, we want to talk about bureaucracies. I will tell you, I'm in the heart of it because I have now twice been within 2 hours of getting my pilot's license and had my final check ride scrubbed for weather reasons.
Oh,
So I've got my oral done, I've got my written done. Even my instructor seems to believe I'm ready. I believe I'm ready. I have my notes for my check ride on the lock screen of my phone, so I'm ready to go just for memory purposes. But weather, man, doesn't cooperate. This would be much more authentic neck scarf, though, if I was actually a full pilot.
Yeah, Blue
It's been
Baron.
very windy. Has it been windy up in Marin for you guys?
Kicking up in the afternoons.
What's going on?
Low pressure in the afternoons, indeed.
Okay. Before we bore everyone with meteorology, let's get to the topic of the week, guys. I think we have to talk about what's happening on college campuses across the country. Not obviously a tech story, but clearly one that it speaks to the heart of a lot of what's going on in our culture and is very, very relevant. And yeah, I mean, it's just been absolutely shocking to see these protests and encampments building at universities across the land. And Sam, I know you're following this more closely as our resident college instigator. But
is Sam the resident culture wars expert?
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Guys, I have to admit, I want to get into this. I care about this. I think it matters. I think it matters to the tech industry. But I remember when we started this podcast, we're like, hey, we're going to make a non-misogynistic tech podcast, and we're going to stick to tech. We're not going to do politics. And here we are 1 year in. It turns out it's just too tempting. We have to get into politics.
I'm terrified.
Me too.
I think that's an accurate assessment, Sam. But at the time, we were talking about like not interviewing presidential candidates on our podcast.
That we won't do.
And that we won't do until one of them wants to come on, honestly. I'll grab a microphone. But it just, I would love to hear, Sam, kick us off here. And maybe, obviously, everyone listening knows what's happening. But I think a little bit of scene setting. And what's interesting to me, and there are very smart people opining on this and our back channel and on social media and others, but like there's a broader moment going on here that I think could be very, very significant for so many things. So that's where I think we should dig in.
I mean, it's really hard to even know where to begin. I've heard so many So basically, as everyone who doesn't live under a rock probably has noticed, all the elite colleges of America, you've had these encampments, right? And they started at Columbia. There's one at Brown. There's at Harvard. It's everywhere, right? And the responses
UCLA.
Everywhere. And the responses of schools and communities, there's just so many angles to this. One is like the relative speed of students who want to protest about stuff or do encampments or make statements versus administrative responses, and like the gulf of like rapid fire, how these administrations respond. There's massive difference in response types, right? And you had Columbia, where I think last night they did the right thing and they just arrested everyone and we're moving on, right? And Mayor Adams, who's a NYPD person's, just like, we're not hanging the flag of Palestine or Hamas, or if we want to put it over the American flag, sorry. You have Harvard, which seems totally hamstrung. You have Brown, which cut a deal with the protesters, which gives them optical ability to leave the encampment, but it's a really interesting hostage type situation where it seems, there's all these questions about where we go from here. But this is like a really hard one to even get into, because we got to talk about how, youth culture has changed, the value of protest. We can talk about grade inflation and how that plays into this. There's so many angles we can go down.
And also I think first and foremost too, if we focus in on what it kind of means for the broader business world, I think that is relevant, because all of those themes that you talked about are tied to it. And we're also seeing, a few weeks ago, protests at Google over some of the Google Cloud technology being used in the Israeli military. And Google very swiftly, I believe, fired the people involved, right?
Yeah, which was great and the correct response. Look, I think the end...
There's one other thing here, which, we were doing a meeting with some folks from a university on Monday. And they mentioned something which I didn't realize was going on. My response in that meeting, and even to kick this off, is there are sort of two different things here that matter. One is, there's all the nuance, Sam, that you just mentioned that we should get into, and the nuances of the Israel and the Palestine and all of the different perspectives there. On the other hand, there's also the First Amendment and the right of peaceful assembly, right? And we've got a whole lot of non-peaceful assembly going on. And I don't really understand why we didn't just interject immediately when this stuff became non-peaceful, right? I think that's like number one. And as I was saying this in this meeting, the folks from the university said to me, well, you realize that many of the people on these campuses aren't actually students.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that. And then I was reading the New York Times this morning and reading the way that the articles were structured and the language that was being used. And even in reading today's New York Times, it is not clear that this is one of the things that's happening. And I don't think people really realize this, that there's actually a whole lot of people involved in these things that are not actually students. And I think that really confuses things and almost makes these things like deep fake protests.
And the question on top, it gets even crazier. And I think we should try to keep this focused on the tech angle and the tech company angle of it. But Dave, do you even agree with it? The other thing is people are asking is, there's a whole infrastructure and apparatus supporting these things, which are not students, right? So who's paying for these? Who's organizing these? Like things like that are all really complicated questions. There's no question that elite institutions are great symbols in America, right? And, the great symbols, we're talking about them constantly, right? And so there's kind of this question of how do you hijack symbols and what's a deep fake versus a real protest, et cetera. But look, I think—
And even the question of like, what is real here, right? Like as soon as I heard that, I was taken aback.
Dave, they're not students. Can you say more? Are they faculty? Are they people affiliated with the university?
No, they're not faculty. No. There's people, they're just
people.
Protesters. They're just activists.
And that's why New York and Columbia has been more challenging than Harvard, where they locked it down to students, but it's complex. This is a very deep issue. Can I try to propose a framework for how we can talk about this with tech companies? Because I think there's a way to look at it, right?
Sure.
Which is, look, at the highest level, there's been a lot of social trends going on, but we all know that during George Floyd and in that era and in the middle of COVID, a lot of organizations wrote a bunch of checks they couldn't cash, right? In terms of, what their hiring was going to look like and DEI and things like that. And they were even contrary to their interests or mission. The nice part about for-profit companies is that they have profits and very clear goals, right? And the goal is to make money or to build this project or whatever. And so, for instance, when you say, okay, we had these goals, they were able to walk back a lot of that stuff or walk away from it when it wasn't working and say, no, our job is to support shareholders and shareholder value, full stop, right? And I think that's what makes it a cleaner. And you've seen actually a lot of the tech companies recover more rapidly from some of this stuff and draw a harder line about what their purpose is and what their goals are.
Sam, just to pause there, and then I'll come back to you. I think that is largely right, but you still have really big, I think, pockets inside these companies of people who don't feel that way. I think there are a lot of employees who wouldn't say this is like settled, that the goal of the company is profit.
Well, but those people can leave and they can be fired because in the end of the day, they're
can be. I'm kind of interested in like where we are on the curve here. I agree that there have been moments in the past immediately pre-COVID to the present where the companies, felt they really had to take a stand on a lot of political, cultural issues. Then you had people, you guys remember when Brian Armstrong at Coinbase was basically like, no politics at work.
He did a great job. And that was the right answer.
I think he did. But when he first staked out that, it was seen as controversial. And
I think the thing to keep in mind, Jess, in that era, and I think this is important, is like that was an era where everything was about attracting talent and young talent at any cost, right? Like it was all a culture. How many people could you acquire and, keep butts in seats and keep people working at these tech companies? And look, the world's got leaner and meaner since then from a business perspective. People are firing employees. It's much easier to say we want the people who are aligned. And now, to make a joke, if you told me all the AI researchers in the world started feeling a certain way, you might get a response from some companies. But the reality is your average tech worker has no leverage, right? And companies have missions. So it's very simple.
Okay, finish your point, and then I want to get to Britt on, but I did interrupt you.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the point, that the reason that universities are so challenged in this at the highest level is that unlike tech companies, their missions are way wishy-washier, right? Like it's unclear exactly what they're optimizing for, and they make all sorts of claims, and the power structures are different, and the governance structures are different. They're not as clean, right? And so as a result, I do think the answer for universities has to be to go back to their core knitting, which is universities exist to produce academic excellence, full stop. And if you got back to that and you went back to making courses difficult, make it hard to graduate, make it meaningful to graduate, make the academic mission the actual true north, you'd solve a lot of these problems. But the problem is, as it is right now, you have the opposite, which is wishy-washy goals, wishy-washy governance, faculties that, interestingly, if you think about it, if you used 50 years ago, if you wanted to be an academic sort of person, universities were great employers. Now the reality is like there are so many great private employers of intellectuals of all fields. The only people left are a very stilted, faculty, which people serve. You kind of go down the chain and they're in a really rough spot, all the way down to the students, right? Where like there's all these issues where, if you're a student in the humanities and it's easy coursework. And by the way, there's grade inflation, so you're not going to differentiate on that. This becomes the cultural differentiation, which, by the way, and I'll stop, but like 5 years ago, employers were saying, hey, we want activists, right? Because we can't differentiate you guys on grades because you all get A's in your made up humanities classes.
What you mean? So you think Google and Microsoft and Meta were looking for?
Yes, I think they basically, and there's hilarious. I mean, there's this is certainly true of universities. You go on Yale's website, they have this whole 2018 blog post about how they really want high school activists on their campus and how they won't hold them accountable for their protests and all this type of stuff. So they invited this. And then the employers did too, because in the George Floyd, et cetera, era, they all said, we want social activists and da-da-da. It was like a selling point for them. So they're kind of getting what they asked for up and down the chain, right? The problem is that I think, the companies will recover much faster from this cultural moment than the universities will.
Yeah. Brett, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm just curious if, within literally the next month, this has to disband naturally just because school is ending. It's summertime. So like, where do these activists go from there?
If they're not all students, maybe they'll stay.
No, that's what I'm saying. Well, but like, I think they're trying to make a point by being around the students, being there while school's in session. Like, are they going to continue to stay at the universities? Yeah. And then secondly,
it's brand hijack.
I feel like this happens to tech companies too. Like no one wants to be first to make a hard decision and maybe risk, reputational factors in that. And so, is there any signal in being like an alliance of sort? Like, do you think the university presidents are all talking about how should we position ourselves in this together? Would that be a good thing, bad thing? Is there any way that there's just like a quicker way for the dominoes to fall into place here?
I don't think so. I think these guys, unfortunately, don't really coordinate enough, right? In terms of how they think about or respond to these things. They think about their campuses and communities differently. And they're very hamstrung, is my honest sense, in a lot of cases. I mean, there are exceptions. Like University of Florida has done there are places that have done a good job with this. And there are places like Chicago, which have really clear principles. Right. Mm-hmm. Because they have really clear principles and they articulate them really well. The president of Chicago's letter was fabulous, being like, this is the protest allowed. This is what's not. You do this, you get arrested. You do this, it's fine. And you're like, great. Thank you for the clarity. Right. But I think the problem is that a lot of these, complicated organizations without enough clear direction, they're just kind of drifting. And the students, they have nothing. They think they have nothing at stake, although I'll never hire any of them.
But Brett, I'm curious, as an observer of Silicon Valley and a former employee of Google, I mean, does it feel like what level are these culture wars now simmering at these big tech companies? And also, I'm trying to remember, and I think we did a podcast around this time, but in reaction to October 7th, the big companies were largely quiet, right? Some individual execs spoke out, but there was a sense there, and I think we talked about a frustration that they weren't quicker to decry terrorism because they were feeling kind of hamstrung and all of that. So I'm wondering if we can kind of trace that to now. It doesn't seem, I mean, with the exception of Google and that one thing that was quickly put to rest, it doesn't.
I was at Google from 2007 to 2011 and don't remember anything like this ever happening. And, that was the advent of the real ramp of social media. And I would imagine the curve of these protests follows the curve of everything else that, social media has done wrong in our society. And so I do think we're just at an unprecedented time where these leaders of these organizations, these universities, these technology companies have to draw those hard lines. I would imagine that like 5 or 10 years from now, it's actually much simpler. We're just at this inflection point where this hasn't really been done like this before. So what do you do? And how do you make sure to enforce this going forward?
Simpler, how do you think?
Oh, because I think they're going to create these boundaries, like what they were saying about Chicago. Like, this is okay, this is not. You will get arrested if you do this. You will not get arrested if you do that. Here's our answer to what happens when like there's a war, or there's like a terrorist attack, or the nation's capital has a terrorist attack inside our own country. Like, here's what we will talk about, what we won't talk about. Here's what you're allowed to talk about and not talk about. I don't know. I just think that it's going to get much cleaner and simpler.
I don't know. To push back on that, like, or maybe this is just a grand commentary on the short memory span of the collective human memory, right? I mean, I was looking back at some videos of Ronald Reagan when he was president addressing the protests that were going on in the 80s on campus. And, you can go back to the 70s and the 60s, like every decade, there's something like this that happens. And the fact that Ronald Reagan, right, the beacon of conservative politics, was addressing this, and he was addressing it with quite a lot of force in the 80s, and it was a very similar situation where you had students and activists that were causing damage, really doing harm to, people and structures and universities, and the hammer had to come down, right? And I guess that's what I'm pushing on here, Britt. Like, is this really that different, other than that you now have these things empowered, to Sam's point, by, internet technologies? There's like a lot of coordination going on behind the scenes. So you have like there's like a rapid scaling of these protests maybe that didn't happen in the past. And then I guess combined with like Sam's point of like, you just have a lot of rudderless, kind of leadership-less institutions that have been kind of mired in gobbledygook, lack of strategy and policy and leadership.
Well, and even just goals. Like, I think the reality is, like, one thing I think I think you can see both sides of it. To be more in on Brits, this is a particularly disruptive period that will be resolved. One thing that technology does is it really takes any squishy principle you have and forces you to like codify it, right? Like anything that's kind of wishy-washy, it's like will get exploited and pushed in weird directions. Any uneven edges or simple. And so what technology does is kind of like a binary thing, is it forces you to put very specific guardrails in place, right? And then adhere to those. Like it's just a rules-based engine fundamentally. And so I do think that given the moment we're in, historically the universities could kind of manage. You'd have a good president, you'd have a good head of the board, they were invested, you'd kind of get away with a lot and kind of managing on your own and making reasonable decisions without very clearly articulated principles and goals. And I think that has to go away. You need, it's kind of like, another way to put it is like, the faster you go, the more serious the consequences are of mistakes, and techs make everything go faster, right? And so you just need better guardrails. And I think we'll get those.
The nature of the businesses that these companies are in also matters a lot for this issue. And when, Brett, you're talking about the rise of the social era, right? That's where you really saw, think of Trump's election, right? Like, think of the big switch I think these companies made from being like, we're going to have the lightest touch possible moderating, to like, actually, we can't do that from an advertising perspective, and just sort of like going back and forth on that. And I wonder, actually, as things move more towards AI and other kinds of business models, and less the kind of like having to keep big brand marketers happy, and as the business model changes, does it give the companies more license to not have to engage in these issues, or less? Or I don't know how those things are related, but it seems like the business models of the companies also have a lot to do with what stance they take on these issues.
Well, wasn't Twitter a perfect example of that, right? A lot of brands pulled out of advertising on X, based on Elon and everything else that was happening there. But how detrimental was it to that business? It didn't, a lot of them came
I guess my
back.
point is more like, if I think it's right to say that this moment is sort of defined by a lot of the companies sort of being able to distance themselves, their business, and their employees from some of these issues. Not all of them, but some of them. And also to recognize that these things are a cycle. And I think part of the reason they can do that is because the businesses went through huge layoffs and like there's just have a lot of leverage that swung back. I think if you play it out, I mean, we've talked a lot about OpenAI and how we think a lot of the decisions have been made there have been made by very zealous people who, not necessarily on culture war issues, but, maybe AGI and those things do become culture war issues and it seems very beholden to employees. So I don't know. I guess it's like on the corporate side, which way do we think the pendulum's swinging? Do we think 3-5 years from now we'll be in the same boat where, Google's going to do deals with the Israeli military and fire its companies who oppose, or, are we at the risk of things swinging back?
Look, yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's the beauty of capitalism is a very clear true north, single bottom line, profit, right? That's what these companies value. And you can talk about long-term profit, short-term profits. We can argue about trading off tomorrow's profit versus profit in 10 years. That's a great argument about value. But this has been my argument against double, triple bottom lines the whole time, which is like, if you can't reduce it down to the number you're optimizing for in the modern world, and then you can't write specific rules, right, which are the guardrails on that optimization that are clear and followable and simple and legible, you're in a world of hurt, right? And so, for me, it's when you try, when you try to balance it, when the rules get too complicated, when you're trying to optimize for too much, you start arguing about how many units of X are worth how many units of Y. That's where all the debates come. And I do think companies get that and they're clarifying it. I do think, candidly, the only way forward for universities is for them to understand that as well, right? And I think that's going to be really hard for them because they are so historically managed by balance and not by objective reality, right?
I'm not sure. I agree with that, Sam, but I'm not sure that look at OpenAI and Anthropic, two of the most valuable private companies, huge magnets for recruiting engineers, recruiting the top talent. Well, both of those are not traditional corporations because it wasn't the optimal structure for recruiting talent. So I think you could easily see the swing and see.
I do think that AI talent is the exception because it's the only scarce talent in the world right now. Right. Like in the end of the day, leverage is a thing. Right. And like the reality is if there was 100 researchers in the world and all that they want to do matters, then like actually like whether it's the Manhattan Project or AI, they've got a lot of leverage together. Right. Especially if they know each other and can coordinate. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, if the AI specialists, right, and they really can hold that power, like have a different framework, they'll be able to exert a lot of leverage over who's technically employing them. But the reality, honestly, of the moment we're broadly in is not that. It's a moment of commodification of labor and capital, right? And because labor and capital are getting commodified, leverage will go to like the purest organizations, right, with the clearest mission. And, if you don't like it, you can go do something else.
Yeah.
I do think for what it's worth, this is the thing that I think these protesters are also, the protesters' interesting double mind. You say, what is going through these guys' heads? Right? Like, what are they thinking? Right? And there's like 6 layers of, they're looking for community. They're looking to like differentiate themselves in the sea. The interesting thing for me is you got to believe that some of them really, really in their heart of hearts believe that this is not going to come back to them in some form, right? That they're going to get the same job at whatever. And that they're going to be excused for, breaking.
Do you, or have they convinced themselves that they're martyrs and it's okay if they get fired?
I don't think look, I promise you, Harvard students are not martyrs, right? Harvard students.
Well, Harvard students who were accepted in the last 4 years.
Maybe that's part of the problem is that they got too many people who are going to martyr themselves. But it's a real shame. I mean, my sense is honestly, you have some people who think this won't come back to them and they're living in last year's job economy. Right? Or 5 years ago, jobs economy to believe that. And then I think there are others who believe that actually this is their resume builder, right? Which is, and I think that's actually a bigger trend, which is, again, I go back to this grade inflation point. If you're in the sciences, right, you don't see a lot of science. Those guys are studying broadly, right? And like their grades matter and they're real. But a lot of these fake humanities, I say this as a social studies concentrator.
Which is the definition. It is a fake humanity. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I'd like to pretend it isn't, but I'd argue it's a hell of a lot closer to a fake humanity.
It matches that scarf very nicely.
So it's a lot closer to a fake one than it is to physics. Is what I'd say is like, if there's huge grade inflation, so everyone's getting A's, right? Then everything comes down to like, what is your leadership? Like, and I actually, unfortunately, cynically believe that for a bunch of these people in the organizations they want to go into, and like the job careers, especially if they're cut off from certain types of jobs that are more technical, they actually think this is a resume builder, and that's why they're doing it.
Got it. Okay. So to end on this segment before we move on, are there lessons for companies right now, especially in hiring? And Sam, I know you've been opining on this on the X, but if you're running recruiting and you're hiring, gobs and gobs of this talent, like what's the lesson? And don't just say don't do it, because that's not what's going to happen. What do you think will happen in that part of the market?
Look, I think you should just really ask your questions about who you're hiring. What is, again, you're not going to ask them, and fire them or not hire them because they participated in a protest, right? But you can say, hey, like, how are you led, right? How do you lead, right? Like, how do you feel about working with people you disagree with? Like those types of questions I think are critical. And the reality is I think most of these protesters will fail those tests. And those are the most important things. I mean, set aside the question of, again, I would certainly ask, hey, if you work with me, you're investing in Israeli companies. How do you feel about that? You don't want to invest in Israeli companies? It's completely fine. Tell me now, because I don't want to work with you and you're going to under-optimize your career. But I also just think like you just need to really get to, there's clearly you can no longer say, well, you went to Harvard, you went to Brown, you went to Stanford, you've got the right values to do a lot of business. It's going to be a thing where employers really need to dive into the culture of whether they want to hire these people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, more to come, and hopefully this, pretty tragic situation. Well, all the tragic situations, including, of course, the war. But
I don't think that the protests are tragic. I think they're just comical and like a ridiculous.
And just to throw in one last thing, it doesn't seem to be impacting things at the corporate level. Like this seems to be isolated to universities. Like, I mean, I don't know if you're hearing differently, but
I agree. It seems eerily quiet at the corporate level.
Well, because it's ridiculous, right? And like
people want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, and like I think Google does the right thing. You fire the right few people for inching around this. The problem is when if you have rules and you let people trample them, you're screwed, right? You have to enforce your own rules, right? And I think these companies are just going to the more they understand that they have the power to, and the universities, unfortunately, just don't understand this yet. Or at least not all of them.
I'm also, just another thought. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me that, the presidential election hasn't really yet fanned a lot of these flames either in terms of just general activism. And I think I was talking to friends who work at CNN and were basically saying that like overall interest in the election seems down, period, for understandable reasons. But I think that's another data point that things... that the shift inside companies or the approach has changed, because you're just not seeing as much activism agitating, even the so-and-so hosting a fundraiser for so-and-so seems like kind of a muted response. So,
well, and I think the thing I also say is like, I do think that these protests, they really take away a lot of the center left's ability to complain about a lot of the Trump bullshit. Because it's the same stuff, right? And the extremes are the same on both angles. And so I think like in some ways, the moral rectitude on some of this stuff is getting all scrambled, right? In terms of how people approach some of these problems and spaces.
Yes, the world is confusing would be an inconsistent.
The world is confusing, but profits are ripping and companies are doing great because they figured out how to hold the bottom line.
Okay.
And now there's no non-competes. And so, it's going to get even better.
Unbridled competition all the way.
Unbridled capitalism.
Speaking of unbridled capitalism and competition, I don't know if this registers for you guys. This may be a tech reporter thing, but we're entering like summer developer conference season. Is that a thing that registers?
I think that's a tech reporter thing.
It's not summer yet, but everyone squeezes shit in before summer.
It is so summer right now.
What are you talking about?
This is okay.
Brett, what are you talking about?
We need to redo our seasons for Silicon Valley because everyone squeezes shit in up until Memorial Day, and then nothing else happens until after Labor Day. So summer is April and May in Silicon Valley.
We literally had in a meeting, my team was like, they're like, VC, it's back, it's ripping, all these huge deals. And I'm like, no, this is just clearing the decks before the 3-month summer hiatus. With this.
I'm a little worried about this podcast because like, what are we going to talk about when nothing's happening over the summer?
Last summer, there was tons of stuff. I remember recording and
Threads launched. It was so hot.
We had MMA. Oh my God, the summer of MMA.
Oh, yeah.
Elon will keep things spicy this summer.
I think there's going to be a lot. There'll be a lot. But
we've got like Rabbit launching more stuff.
Oh, yeah, we got a rabbit. Do you guys know what a rabbit is?
You guys got one of these?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
Well, guys, we're the Moors.
You love hardware that's going to zero, don't you?
Okay. First, so
Love it.
for our listeners who don't know, the Rabbit is one of these hot new AI hardware devices. And Maureen, tell us how you use this.
It's designed by the same team that designed your microphone, Jess.
Yeah, Jess. Yeah, hate on all your hardware. Let's see if you can speak clearly
I
without
hadn't
that.
heard of this company until Dave Morin. This is a very precious microphone, and it looks teeny tiny. Okay, what does the Rabbit do? Why do I need one? Go.
Well, interestingly, I'm a glutton for teenage engineering design stuff. And so that was really what it was about for me. And I also do respect Jesse Ryu, the founder. I think he's got really awesome product sense. So I ordered it and I basically had it halfway set up and it was summarily stolen by my 9-year-old. And he's been using it like every day and is absolutely in love with it. And it's an interesting contrast to, watching Marquise Brownlee's reviews or, all of the hate going on in the tech world about this. And I just thought it was interesting that the younger, watching a kid just like love this thing has been a really interesting.
What is it, Dave? Like, what is it?
And it's an AI driven device. So you have basically a voice and a camera interface for
like
it.
How big? Like, show me. Like, is it like an Alexa? Is it like I wear it?
It's about half the size of an iPhone.
Okay.
And I can bring it up here to show people what it looks like. And, these devices are getting a lot of hate. There's a lot of people building AI-driven hardware and trying to take a swing at this and create a different vision of the future for computing. And I think this also kind of fits into what's going on with AR and VR. There's a lot of people taking swings at what the next way to think about computing might be, driven by GPUs and AI, right?
I'll say Vinod Khosla, who I forgot actually wants to be on our podcast. So
we should definitely have Vinod.
Oh, let's get Vinod on.
I'm a little nervous. Okay, let's do it.
Come on, I love Vinod.
It'll be hard to get on his schedule, but I have an email saying that. But he wrote an op-ed for The Information recently about hardware and AI. He is the largest investor in Rabbit, I believe. And he was talking about, this just being key to unlocking a lot of potential with AI. And the example he used was like being on a hike and being able to identify the flowers he was seeing without like having to, hold up a camera and then pull up the right app for flower identification. Sam is shaking his head.
Boo.
Sam, stop and smell the flowers, okay?
Yeah. The thing that I was going to say, that the thing that my son's favorite thing is actually that use case, Jess.
That is why this will fail.
Oh, Sam.
Because that is not like...
Sam, have some optimism about entrepreneurs trying hard things.
Maybe you're old and the future is in the hands of 9-year-olds.
I must look, guys. The flower, first of all, I like all naturalists too. Every once in a while I say, what is that plant? And I click a little button and it works on my phone, right? The thing that is stopping me from doing that more often is I don't care or I already know, right? It's not that like my life is so poor because I'm wandering around nature and I'm constantly thinking, man, I really have to take out my phone to identify yet another flower. Like, this is not a thing.
But Sam, you're also a person who carries an old phone that is much smaller than all the other newer phones. I think out of the idea that you would like to use your phone less. And you're also the person that I know that had their phone set in black and white for years in order to try to make yourself use your phone less.
To be clear, I'm fine with that. And you know what I will say in terms of this, in terms of like, I do think there's a path here. I gotta say, I finally got convinced by enough friends to actually buy the next generation Meta glasses. I like them. It's a camera and an audio feed, and it's nice to be able to take a photo of something without taking out your phone. Could I imagine if it was very important to me that I'd be like, hey, what's this plant Meta glasses? Sure. Right. But like the idea that there's going to be a startup hardware entrant right, that is able to plow the amount of money over the amount of time in to compete with the glasses or something. It just doesn't. I just don't think it's real. I think it's like a.
So here's my take tied to the topic, and then I want your take, Britt.
Yeah.
So I think this is like not even V1 of new types of hardware that will be enabled with AI and so forth, right? And I think you're largely right in your assessment of their utility now, Sam. And I think for that reason, they're a really tough investment and so forth. But 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I don't think the smartphone is going to be as dominant as, I mean, I could be wrong actually, but I probably not in terms of how we're interacting with it, right? Or it's a companion to other things. And I think what we're just seeing is, and I kind of love this phase of tech battles because everyone's kind of, they're assembling their arsenal, right? And you're looking at, Meta, which was out early ahead on the hardware side with some of these things, and then putting together the AI piece and investing in that. You've got Apple, super dominant in hardware, emerging / struggling / who knows, but looking to partner on AI. Then you've got OpenAI, which leaps and bounds a leader in certain phase of the model development, but has no distribution, no built-in network. And there's just no question that, and then Google, which I think just kind of lost the PR battle on AI, to be honest, more than the technical battle, and is maybe slowly winning it back and kind of has a mixed track record on hardware, but has some presence there. And what we're going to see maybe for a long time is all these companies just try to put stakes in all of these areas. And I think we'll see this more as Google and Apple kind of have their big developer events in the next few weeks. The other thing I think we're going to hear a ton about is agents. So I just predict a lot of AI agent combo. But Britt, what do you think?
All right, guys. My prediction is, and men, stay with me here. I think in the future, you're going to pick out the phone or digital accessory you're carrying with you during the day, like a woman picks a handbag. And let me explain what I mean by that. Most days, you want the normal thing. You want your smartphone. It does a bunch of things. It's like what everyone else has, fine. And then there are going to be special occasions when you want certain other handbags that are unique and different. Let me point out, by the way, dumb phone sales are continuing to increase.
I just looked it up. And I use it exactly that way. I love it.
They're accounting for 10%.
How is this any different? I think this fits into the exact trend.
I'm arguing for this trend, Dave. I'm a more. Dumb phones are about 10% of all mobile phone sales worldwide. I don't know if you saw Heineken and Bodega, which is a streetwear brand, actually launched the boring phone this week, which literally just looks cool and does text messaging and phone calls.
Perfect.
I think this is a massively real trend.
I think this is a real trend. And you're going to pick out your dumb phone or your Rabbit or whatever when you know what you're doing that day and you don't want your whole smartphone and everything else to distract you. Maybe you're going to the botanical garden, Sam. You want your Rabbit to tell you what all the plants are.
Let me just push on you. I am 100% I am more in on hyper commodified hardware, aka your dumb phone, and fashionable cheap accessories where you take your phone with you. I have one. I actually have two. And it was because Casey Neistat, a mutual friend of ours, showed me his, which, by the way, is hilarious.
On the pod, he talked about how he's getting more requests.
It's great. I docked my night phone. That's a shout out to Dave Morin, and flipped the SIM into
2012 called once its jokes back, Sam.
You know.
So I'm all for the night phone.
Don't stop believing.
But there's a huge difference between that and hardware startups, right? It's one thing for Apple, Facebook, whatever, who do not care, right? It is just research for them. They can put stuff out and they can take 10 years. What I'm really against, though, is what I call, and I say this with respect for actually teenage engineering, but I'll call it artistic entrepreneurship, where there's no prayer that these devices work. It's fun to invest in.
They get acquired by the big guys.
I just disagree.
No, the only path for them, right, for those teams is they get to make something really cool, which I respect as an art project, and then maybe they get to be the general magic team, and someday Google acquires them, and 20 years later they get to design the actual thing that works, right? So it's just a very inefficient use of venture capital.
Okay, I'm going to give the Morins a rebuttal specifically on the point of artisanal hardware. I would like you to list all the artisanal hardware you use at least once a week. Go.
So, look, I think that
Dave ignored my question, but I've
got one. I've actually got one queued up. I'm going to pull it up. And look, the Apple One was literally made of wood and a PCB board, and started out as a hobbyist device. Like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were taking this thing around to the Homebrew Computer Club, and they were trying to create something that hobbyists and hackers and their fellow nerds would get excited about. And so I don't think it's an unreasonable idea to try to create something that gets hackers and people that are interested in this theme or this trend that we're talking about excited about a new way of going about it. And I guess that to me is the thing here. Sam, you're right. Maybe people's ambitions aren't big enough, but I don't know. I look at what's going on with Rabbit and they seem to have big ambitions, and just to your point about agents, one of the things Rabbit's talking a lot about is, they've created this, they call a large action model, which is they basically have just trained a model on a lot of the ways that mobile phone apps work and what buttons people click on so that they can front end that stuff with a language model. And, who knows whether that's going to work, but it's a novel and interesting idea.
Dave, I respect what you're saying. I think it's a great experimentation. I think the question is, what types of organizations are designed to experiment? Can big companies experiment? Of course, it's a rounding error for them. And it's fine. They can bring a real search better. Can universities, can kids, absolutely. This is actually, maybe we talk about universities to start. Should there be more university exploration of these types of form factors in design schools? Sure.
Not a bad idea.
Sure. But the thing that I find offensive as a professional venture capitalist is the startup of 0 to 1 companies and the idea of using startup capital for these types of exercises, which are almost certainly infinitesimally unlikely to work and are extremely capital consumptive in general, that just is the wrong match for VC, right? And so to me, when I see these things, they look really cool. I totally understand how they happen. The VCs like them, they're cool. The people doing them are I get someone's going to give me a bunch of money to go do something, a cool art project. But this is not art. This is LP capital, right? And so that's kind of the thing that frustrates
how
me.
do Nest investors?
Yeah.
But Nest
Sam,
is a great example.
We were an investor in Nest.
Nest was the luckiest fucking acquisition ever, right? Had that been 6 months later, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Okay, but you
right?
can say that in most acquisitions.
I just disagree.
You also invested in Aura.
But Aura's not a good company. It's a great product, right? And
Why?
This is the thing I think just to keep in mind.
Did the world just not have anything made of atoms that's new?
No. I just don't think it can come from startups in a reliable way. I think it's totally commodity hardware, sure, right? There's things you can do, but I think the track record of venture capital going into consumer hardware, there are a few examples of people who just barely got out by the skin of their teeth with reasonable outcomes, right? Ring, Nest, etc. But those were not actually fundamentally strong companies. Those were reasonable acquisitions that they got away with, right? I just think it's upsetting to see people pouring more money yet again into hardware projects that are clearly not going to be financial returns.
But isn't it getting cheaper and cheaper to do hardware with
And it was, yes.
I think it's still super hard.
It is.
I want to know, how is the mill, guys? Speaking of
Mill's
Nest,
so good.
Oh, that's artisanal hardware we use every day.
you grind
We love
your
the mill.
garbage?
The mill grinds your compost and turns it into soil. It's one of the biggest sort of
We plug it
plagues
often
on the
this
planet.
pod, but
And they've done a fantastic job building this product. They've raised a lot of capital. They have incredible investors.
Yeah, but it's also the co-founder of Nest.
yeah. But
And
also,
look, to be clear, okay, that's a lot easier. A big old composting heap pile is a hell of a lot easier than consumer electronic
magically
hardware.
turning your garbage. It doesn't sound easy, but also, and I'm going to say this, and I don't even know the right way to say it without sort of getting in trouble, but I'm surprised I'm not heavily marketed this product. I am exactly the target demographic for this product, yet I only know about it because of you guys, and which makes me think it's just in very, very, very small, they can't produce a lot of these. Because
have you not purchased one? Why haven't you purchased?
Well, I haven't. No one has ever told. I've never seen a single ad. I've never read a single article. Maybe I read one article before it was even launched. They don't seem to want to sell them.
But your podcast co-hosts have talked it up multiple times, and you still haven't purchased.
I'm going to take this on a wildly different angle, which will intersect with Sam's favorite topic, which is the creator economy.
Oh, I love the creator
And then
economy.
we're going to wrap because the people got to do the things.
One of the other, it may not be every week, but it's every few weeks. The amazing YouTube creator Mark Rober is shipping out real hardware to now, I think they've shipped millions of these boxes to kids, and they're now shipping them with electronics in them and teaching kids how to think like an engineer. And he's actually building quite an incredible business doing this. And I think that maybe that's an angle to take this in, Sam, is that if you can figure out a fusion of the, creator economy distribution with, hardware distribution at low cost to create, high margin, then you've got a pretty good business on your hands.
There is plenty of commodity electronics in the world that you can slap together in a nice package and sell with margin. That is not what we're talking about with these AI hardware companies. If it's truly off-the-shelf commodity stuff, I think there's a ton you can do with it, and that's really exciting, right? I just think that there's a very big difference between that and doing quote-unquote hardware innovation. And the hardware innovation is just not a match for early-stage venture capital.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. I think we need tinkerers and people to be building these things.
Yeah, we should just put them in universities and give them research grants.
Investing in the media business. No, news is not a venture-backed business. Hardware that tells you what flowers it is.
Yeah, let's go back. Bell, if you look at Bell Labs, you look at Xerox Park, right? Xerox Park, we can all agree in Silicon Valley lore, I would assume, is the ultimate place of true innovation of hardware form factors, of all this shit.
But isn't that kind of making your point? I mean,
no,
as far as I understand, the Alto was $20 million a pop.
Oh, I have no problem.
It was funded by Xerox, right?
Xerox.
Yeah.
And the reality of that, which is a super interesting thing, is people have tried to do the analysis of what was the patent portfolio worth, whatever. Ridiculous, right? Actually massively profitable, but not the type of thing the startup can be doing. It's just not the right setup. It's basically a private university setup.
Yeah. This all has to get funded some way. I think it's a great point. Well, Britt, do we have any PCC this week? Or we?
I have a really inside look at. It's PCC, but tech PCC. Ready?
What?
Okay.
LinkedIn now has games, and here's the thing that I think everyone listening would be interested in knowing, because they just launched games. And these games, by the way, are very similar to Wordle and every game that the New York Times app has.
I'm Sudoku again, just to keep
the difference is I just played one called Pinpoint, which is the same as Connections in the New York Times app. I solved it in 2 guesses. And guess what? I am the top of the leaderboard for the University of Texas at Austin network across all of LinkedIn as of right now, as I'm talking about this.
Absolutely the only person who's played it.
And so all of you early adopters.
She's the only person at University of Texas.
My request is for everyone listening, you should go play these LinkedIn games, be an early adopter, get to the top of the leaderboard just for a little bit of ego stroking and street cred.
Well, then you just put it on your LinkedIn profile that you're number 2 blank.
I'm sure there's a badge.
I'm the number one for Pinpoint across UT. There you go.
There's something so simple that all these companies are you know what? Games. Who knew?
I think it's funny because it's exactly the opposite of AI stuff. The AI stuff is the world is amazing, futurist, blah, blah, blah. This is stuff we need people to click on more shit games. Just game. It's let's not even be nuanced about it. Wordle works. Just do Wordle.
But the New York Times doesn't have a social graph. I think there's something to this with LinkedIn where you want to brag about how smart you are, right? So you want to share it with your network that you solved this puzzle faster than everyone else.
I did once upon a time try to teach the New York Times how to build a graph, but we can talk about that another time.
Ooh, Facebook Connect.
The analogy is you're trying to teach a pig Latin? Look, I actually, for what it's worth, all shitting aside, I actually don't think that LinkedIn Games is the worst idea I've ever heard.
Remember, you're pro LinkedIn. We're all LinkedIn.
I'm not actually. I refuse to personally use it, but I recognize its power.
I think I was behind to appreciating it, and now I'm fully in on the LinkedIn. So
I post all this shit I post everywhere on LinkedIn.
Speaking of which, a follow-up from last week's PCC is that I'm loving this genre of article, which is, I reacted too strongly to Taylor Swift's new album, and now that I've listened to it for a week, I actually understand it. There's which I actually think is a really interesting phenomena going on in the world. That
Guys, she shattered the charts. You guys are like, she's not going to chart. She shattered.
We need a separate podcast for Taylor Swift.
Well, I think there's this interesting thing where like people try to metabolize new releases of things like in the first hour after they launch, and something that's 31 songs long, or even, you know, new gadgets that take a long time to understand. It's like you can't metabolize it and write about it.
Are you arguing
enough.
We shouldn't rush to opinions and that everyone should be more thoughtful and considerate?
Well, yes. I know that's not going to happen, but I do think it's like a thing that is interesting to be aware of. That,
I still love the album. Loved it. Yeah. Still love it.
It's growing on me. I'm 40% up week over week on my opinion.
You guys are just proving the point that there is no culture. There's just memes.
Yeah,
no,
probably.
The beats grow on you, Sam.
Guys, I have 2 data points, and then we
There's
are
no
going to wrap.
It's just enough people tell you it's good, and you eventually think it's good.
But guys, I saw Taylor's shorts. She clearly has done a deal with YouTube on shorts. This like Fortnite.
Oh, I thought you meant like her physical, like she was wearing.
Too. I was like, yeah, I know.
Too.
What brand is she wearing?
I wish I knew. But so she's doing a campaign with YouTube. Shout out to Google for landing that one. And then also we learned that we are performing well in shorts, which is shocking to us.
We as in more or less?
Yeah. And those 2 things have completely turned my opinion on shorts, which says a lot about how articles get assigned at the information. But with that, friends,
shorts are working for us too, Jess.
Jessica came to me last night. Jessica came to me last night and she said, Sam.
Oh, don't say this. Okay,
I just used TikTok and I used Instagram Reels. They're really funny. And I'm like, Jess.
I had the best time scrolling them for like 20 minutes.
She was like, there are people dancing. There are people telling jokes. There are interests of mine here. I was like, are you fucking kidding?
Welcome to America, Jess.
But I was amused.
Sam might be sleeping in the pool house tonight.
No, I had 10 minutes and I just was like, let myself be sucked down the rabbit holes. And then I also appreciated the irony that I'm discovering TikTok as it's being banned.
There was a period when I used TikTok years ago. I would be like, Jess, these are she gave me time where I was allowed to show her my favorite TikToks
one a day.
And I was like, this is just hilarious and great. And I cannot believe that it took you years later to then go do it yourself.
Guys, it's so delightful. I mean, I love, the moms of all the different places and the birth order ones.
She's like, oh, there's this thing with birth order. I'm like, yes. This is like.
So really the problem with Rabbit is that they should have just had one feature called Rabbit Hole, which just gives you only TikTok and Instagram Reels and nothing else.
If you told me there was a TikTok phone or a Reels phone, it did nothing except for that. Yes. That would sell. But you know what, Dave? That's commodity hardware in 20work, right?
That's what I'm saying, but you can put a nice design on some commodity hardware that does that.
If you could call it a television, you could call it TV, you could put a big old battery on it, and you'd be like, good news, don't run down your iPhone battery anymore. You can use this thing we're releasing called TV that just shows shorts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to go and pull up some reels. Have you guys seen the kids dancing to Beyonce's album? It is so cute. It's so cute. It is heartwarming, like very heartwarming. And sometimes we just need that. So you have permission to go scroll TikTok and Reels, everyone listening to this fine podcast. Thank you again for joining us. Send us topics you'd like us to cover too. We've got some good ones lined up for the week ahead, including some summer reading recommendations. But thank you guys for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye, guys.
See you guys later.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this show, please leave us a virtual high five by rating it and reviewing it on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Find more information about each episode in the show notes and follow us on social media by searching for @MoreOrLess, @DaveMorin, @Lesson, @JLesson, and as for me, I'm @Brit. See you guys next time.